it is common practice to leave behind objects and mementos with special meaning to those we love. We do this to remind them of us, to ensure that our memories are carried on, and to say goodbye. Last year, on February 20th, 2016, my grandmother, Anne, passed away after a long illness. Exactly 1 month later, my grandfather, George, despite being in perfect health, followed her. Among the things bequeathed to me in their will were a necklace worn by my great-grandmother when she eloped with her husband, pieces of my grandmother's vast collection of German Hummels and Yadro figurines, and a piece of their wedding china. And as precious and meaningful as these things are, the most treasured objects I have from them were actually given to me while they were still alive. These photo albums chronicle my life from birth through age 21, and they hold more significance for me than any other memento my grandparents left behind. Today, most people take photography for granted. With the advent of social media and smartphones, we document everything, from important events like weddings and births, to things as mundane as lunch. And for those of us like myself who were born before the advent of these technologies, documenting our lives was a lot more painstaking. I was born in 1986, so by the time social media networks like Friendster and MySpace came onto the scene between 2002 and 2003, I was already almost an adult. And the tool most of us used to photograph our lives didn't make its first appearance until 2007, when the iPhone was introduced. And by that time, I was already 21. And prior to the advent of this technology that makes things so easy, my grandmother carried her camera everywhere she went. She took pictures of everything, and every week would have a new stack of prints for our family to go through and admire. I would often accompany her on the weekly trips to Costco, where she would have her film developed while we shopped. And she had multiple copies made of every photo, so that everyone in our family could have one before she put her favorites into albums and frames. And as much as this may seem like an excessive number of pictures of just one person, I was not the only subject of her photography. She created albums, both digital and analog, for all 7 of her grandchildren, with their own and her original plan was to present each of us with our own collection of photographs on our 21st birthday. But unfortunately, she was only able to do that for the eldest 3 of us. The younger 4 are still all under 21. As of the year 2000, 1 billion rolls of film were being purchased annually, and I suspect that my grandmother had a really big role in that. And even prior to having grandchildren, my grandmother filled albums with her pictures. These were pictures of her children, her 6 brothers and sisters, her parents, her cousins, nieces, and nephews, and there were hundreds of them, chronicling baptisms, weddings, family vacations, and Christmases, and spanning the years from the 1950s well into the 21st century. And one of my aunts is currently the custodian of all of those other albums, which have an entire shelf dedicated to them in her house. As her first grandchild, I had a special bond with my grandmother. As a young parent, my mother would often entrust her mom with my care. I spent almost every weekend with her. I would go with her as she did her weekly errands, attend Saturday evening mass with her and my grandfather, and help prepare the meal that my family would gather for every Sunday. And in many ways, she had a much bigger influence on my formative years than either of my parents did. After all, my dad traveled a lot for work, and my mom suffered from postpartum depression that took a major toll on the first several years of my life, and my grandmother filled in the gaps. This bond extended to road trips and vacations in addition to everyday life, and both of my grandparents had a love of history that greatly influenced where they chose to travel and spend their time. I would join them on countless trips to places like Colonial Williamsburg, Monticello, and Washington, D.C. My grandfather and I in particular shared a love of historical minutiae, And it became sort of a running joke in our family that it would take all day to go to a museum with either one of us because we had to read every sign, plaque, and brochure that we came across. And even as I grew up, my grandmother remained a major focal point in my life. She taught me almost everything I know. I learned how to cook and how to sew at her side. She bought me my first copy of The Joy of Cooking, which I still use all the time. And she instilled in me a love of old movies, musicals, and British sitcoms that I revisit to this day, namely Singing in the Rain, which you sang when you were coming in. That was one of our favorites. And she was present for every major event in my life. From graduations to art openings to the day I left for college, she and her camera were there, making sure that none of it was ever forgotten. It wasn't my parents who went with me to tour college campuses and plan my future. It was her and my grandfather. Every important memory I have has her in it.
Take a deep breath, dear. You're doing an amazing job. Amazing. Take a deep breath.
And every important milestone in my future will be dimmer for her absence.
Breathe. Just breathe. Get the oxygen.
While we all treasure the things left behind by those we love the most, I consider myself to be especially lucky. These albums represent not just something my grandmother once possessed, but something that she made with her own hands. She curated these photos just for me as a symbol of how important my very existence was to her. I don't think I will ever stop missing her, but with these pictures, I will always be able to look at my life through her eyes.